We're live. Okay. Hello, everybody. So we are live. Let's see how we look. Let's see.
Yeah, wait for everybody to join up here.
Yeah. We'll let's see. I posted on Facebook. So let me check on our live here. All right. So I don't know. Okay. We only have 3. So we'll just shoot the bull here for a second about everything.
I should say that just after I wrapped up the Facebook Live, Ryan immediately called and said, "Hey, we've got this thing set up on YouTube. Tom's already waiting, so here we are." I didn't realize; otherwise, I would have plugged it during the.
Yeah, no. Well, I actually messaged Chris Brower. I was like, because I could see he was reading the comments. I was like, "Tell Eric that we're doing this." But I guess he missed that.
Yeah, it's hard to keep track of the comments every time.
Yeah. So we've got 5. Okay, we're gonna get more as people see that we're live. Okay, so hey, Tom, you said that Ing said that they wouldn't have arrested Cooper.
Yeah, right. You know what? And he brought it up out of the blue. He said, if you guys do find him, he says, we're not going to arrest him anyway. I go, what? I was pretty shocked at that, right? He goes, yeah, we don't arrest 90-year-old guys who are going to die in court. Right? So I thought about it for a second. Maybe I've repeated this before. I said, okay, great. Put out a thing saying that you'll give immunity to anybody that comes up with any information on Cooper. What do you got to lose? You're not gonna do anything with it anyway, right? He goes, oh, that's a great idea. And I go, I was first of all shocked that he thought it was a great idea. Every time I suggest an idea to someone up the ladder from me, they never like it. And he went to his boss, and sure enough, his boss nixed it. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe if we get a friendly face in the FBI, in the future here, we can approach that idea again. So maybe Eric, if you want to pull your strings there, I don't know what kind of clout Larry's got these days over there, but maybe Larry's got a friend.
You're talking with well, this is interesting, and maybe Ryan, you could actually answer this question, because my understanding is that the FBI really makes no decisions as far as this goes. Ultimately, this is to the U.S. attorney or the AUSA who is handling this.
Yeah.
And, so in the case of the FBI closing the case, I'm assuming that it was the U.S. attorney in Seattle, because they do have that John Doe warrant out of the U.S. attorney in Portland. Mm-hmm. But I assume the U.S. attorney in Seattle just said, we're not going to pursue it, so you may as well just shut down the shop. Is that a fair?
Yeah.
Is that fair? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's probably what it is. I mean, it's
I know
the
former U.S. attorney there in Seattle. I guess I should just ask her. I don't, she was the former mayor of Seattle. Right. But I think she was before this all happened. Well, so
maybe the window's closed on it now since they closed the case. It would be essentially reopening the case if they're looking for more info.
Right.
Well, the interesting thing is the case even closed? Because, it's like Larry said, all the stuff was sent to Washington, D.C., but then at some point it got sent back to Seattle. So it's
what's back in Seattle? Is the tie back in Seattle?
No, the tie is still in Washington, D.C. The evidence apparently is still in Washington, D.C., but the files are now back in Seattle. And I don't really know why that is.
How did they FOIA them again? How did the FOIA things happening? If somebody's got to be looking at the case thing to FOIA the stuff out.
Yeah.
They're probably not doing that in Seattle.
My guess is that they've already scanned all of the documents and that they have some guy. I mean, because it takes them a while to redact everything. That's why they can only do 350 a month or whatever, right? So I bet they've scanned all the files they have, and just have them on drives or whatever, and they just go and some intern just does the redacting. They redact way too much, by the way. But the physical evidence. Hey, speaking of that, Tom, real quick, and Eric too. I mean, if we are trying to get if the tie and the parachutes and things, won't they be open to scientific research if they become like museum artifacts at the Smithsonian?
So
my understanding is the 50-year point that's what would happen. It essentially becomes an archival type of thing. But for whatever reason, this doesn't apply. I don't know.
Well, so I deal with this every day in paleo, right?
Yeah.
Because you got dinosaurs all over, museums all around the world, and we try and get in there to see these things, right? I spend my damn life doing this. So the answer in the United States is if it's a federal repository, which is a specific thing that you have to qualify for. Most of the big museums that you've ever been in are federal repositories, right? If it's a federal repository, that's like a Library of Congress, that belongs to the public, that stuff. And anyone, in theory, that's the theory, should be able to walk in and say, I want to see the specimens XXX in your basement. And that should apply to everything in their collections, right? You can take a look at everything in their collections. That being said, that's not usually what happens, all right? They can block you for whatever reasons. The most common reason is, oh, we're scheduled out, we can't do it. You have to make a request a year in advance, and it goes. We're trying to get into the British Museum right now to see some archaeological artifacts, and they're saying, well, we're a year out on visitation. We have to go through the board, has to qualify your research approval. You have to know somebody in the museum that's part of this thing that could okay you and all this stuff. So just because it gets into a museum somewhere and we should have access to it does not mean we will.
Mm-hmm. Tom, it's your lucky day. It just so happens I have connections to the House of Lords. We'll get it done.
I'm counting on you, Eric. You're the
like
point of the spear, man.
That's true. But
you're the
I
point of the spear. You take all the heat too. So
I take all the incoming. It's just the way I roll. I'm Teflon Eric at this point. So,
I mean, that does seem to be the best avenue.
I'm keeping it G-rated per Ryan's request because this is a family-friendly podcast here. So
yes, correct. Sure. Yes, sure. Yes. No bad language here, gentlemen.
So let's talk about some tie particles here. So I want to talk about some. I'm going to get in the weeds here. Share my screen.
Okay.
Okay. How many people we got online right now?
Just 9. Well, it's funky, but it says 19. I'm sure we have a lot more than that. And this is going to be permanent too. So this is a permanent YouTube. Anybody can see this forever.
Well, I want to get into a few details here because as these subjects come up, right? The subject came up is, are there two particles together on the tie, and can that create a false image? Okay, so this is one particle, right? This is like 2 blood cells wide. And every color you see in here is a different element. And this is a bunch of like coagulated particles. So each particle, I don't have the regular image from it right offhand, but each of these little dots is an individual particle and they're all clustered together. So you would read them all as a collection of elements that would look like it was a big alloy thing, but it's not. And if you see it, there's a huge variety of colors. There's probably 10 different things in here if you look close. It is a very strange concoction of particles. And this is the kind of thing that you have to be very, very careful of. And there was the discussion as, well, it was Macron, so therefore it's got to be pristine research, right? Mm-hmm. The devil's in the details, right? Macron is a top flight lab. There's absolutely no question about it. But you're only as good as your instrument, right? You're only as good as your instrument. And there's only one instrument that does this kind of automatic scan, find, and analyze. And the instrument is the cheapest electron microscope on the market. It's so cheap that when one broke, they gave me it. I took it home in pieces. They gave it to me just to get rid of it because they were going to throw it out in the garbage. All right. I never was able to make it work. But don't think that because Macron said it, that automatically means it's great. The stuff that they used to automatically find this stuff was the low ball equipment. So the instrument that does the elemental analysis on this thing, I have a better one on my SEM. And you're dealing with how much time it takes to count up X-rays coming off of a particle. So you can't count one X-ray and tell what the thing is. I literally get 10,000 X-ray counts per second. And in order to do that aluminum at high resolution that you saw after the fact when Tim was asking for high res stuff, I did like 2 or 3 hours of integration, 10,000 counts a second in order to be able to get a high res known good spectrum of those aluminum particles. That was for one aluminum particle. So when they're doing this scan, it took, I believe, a couple of days to get through all these particles. they don't spend an hour on each particle, getting down to the nitty gritty. They probably give it 5 or 10 or 20 seconds, maybe at the most, per particle. So we cannot go by what's in the list. If you find something into the list, we got to look at it. We got to go take a look. We got to do one of these things and see, right? And that's the problem. This thing exemplifies the problem. So I wanted to get that out there as a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Comments?
So let's just boil this down to layman's terms. How reliable is the chrome on the face as far as, basically, like, let me just put it this way. I assume that you wouldn't dispute the following, and that is that Macron and the particles that Macron discovered on the tie, 105,000 of them, even though there may be some disparity with respect to balances and certain things are overlap or whatever, at the end of the day, we can still assert with a relative high degree of certainty that these are consistent with aerospace, chemical, a pretty unique and sophisticated field. Is that fair to say?
So yes, that's very fair to say. So when you're looking at one particle, the uncertainty is very high, right? Let me speak first to each particle. Does it have iron in it? Does it have aluminum in it? Very reliable, right? So that atoms get bigger in size. The bigger in size, the easier they are to detect. So heavier things, lead, iron, things like that, much easier to detect in a short period of time and very reliable. As you get down toward carbon and lithium and things like that, where the atom is very small, it's much harder to detect because it's a smaller cross section. I'm trying not to get too far in the weeds here, but there are some elements that are much more detectable than others. Most of those ones are the ones we're interested in, right? Metallic stuff like you would find in manufacturing. Other weird things that are lower down on the list, on the atomic list, are harder to detect and would be less reliable. Now, the overlap problem, there's a bunch of overlap problems. Sometimes you get a situation like with antimony, it's only a single peak and it overlaps with calcium in that case, and there's no other peaks to sort it out. Titanium, there's also an overlap, but there's a little tiny peak, a little secondary peak that will allow us to sort it out. So Chris was saying, well, I want to talk to Tom about what can we look at with no overlaps. It's a very particular case-by-case basis. It's easier for you to say, I want to look into aluminum, what's the overlaps? And then we could figure out how reliable that is. Then for me to say, you could look at all these things and there probably won't be any overlap. So we are really getting into the analytical weeds here when we're trying to do this. And I appreciate that everybody's kind of interested in listening. I try not to go into this level of detail, but we have to now because you guys are spending a lot of time. We're spending a lot of effort going in here. So like I told you, Eric, last year, I said, I don't have my instrument was down a year and a half ago, and I couldn't go into any kind of depth to figure stuff out. So let's try and look at the particles first before we take a deep dive into what they are. Let's try and find out all the ins and outs and pros and cons of a particular particle.
Yeah. So, well, having said that, let's go specifically to the titanium and antimony, the 3 titanium and antimony particles. You made a very compelling presentation at CooperCon saying that, antimony is often, well, I don't know if often is the word, but antimony could be confused, rather calcium could be confused as being antimony. And calcium is 99 times more prevalent in nature than antimony. Therefore, as a matter of protocol, science defaults to the more common
statistically,
particle.
you'd say it's more likely to be calcium. So
but you've heard my argument. You've heard my argument, I presume, pushing back on that. Am I full of baloney or
no? We're having a statistical argument here, right? Okay. So if it's 1 in 100, it's 1 in a 10 bazillion that you're going to win the lottery, but somebody does win the lottery, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of those arguments. Is the lottery impossible to win? Statistically, looking at the big picture, yes, it's like impossible to win statistically. Does it
Yes.
occur? Yes, it does occur. So in the case of this scenario here, if you were being judged on a scientific panel and they said, you know, is it more likely that it's calcium? The panel would say yes. Would there be somebody holding out saying, well, given the fact that all these other metals, all the other stuff on the tie is coming from a metallurgical industry, antimony we know is part of that metallurgical titanium industry. Therefore, Eric could have a case. You know, you can't rule it out completely. So yes, you can say there is a chance that it's antimony titanium on the tie. You would have to then look at a second line of evidence, right? Or you'd have to go to electron microprobe. There's a couple of things that can sort these things out, not easily available to any of us. And especially since we can't find the damn particle on the tie, it's a problem. So yes, you are not wrong in saying that, but statistically, people would argue against you.
Okay, but then let me, because you know I love statistics. That's kind of my field. Let me. I don't know if you heard my argument about the fact that we have 3 particles, and that we have only 3 particles, not 100 to choose from 3, and all 3 are consistent in terms of that 17% antimony relative to the titanium balance, and statistically. If you're going to argue that there's sort of overlap or it's random or whatever the deal may happen to be, to have all 3 particles mathematically line up like that is 99 to the 3rd power, which, as you know, is 1 in 970,260 or something very close to that, literally 1 in a million. So how do you push back from that? Again, if we had an isolated lone particle, that's one thing, fair enough. But when you have 3 from 2 different stubs, so we know it's not the same particle we're looking at, and we got 3 separate particles, and all 3 are consistent, TI versus SB.
Right.
How do you overcome those odds?
So the problem would be there is that if it's from, so we have, I'm going to get in the weeds again here. We have not dove into the match problem. There is a problem with matches, like the matches he uses to light his cigarettes, right? This is a huge problem. Matches have a huge variety of things in them. Titanium being one of the more common things that you find in matches, plus all kinds of other things. Calcium would be a thing you would find in matches. So titanium and calcium would be found in matches. If you analyze the match head by itself, you could sort out the titanium because it would have oxygen in it. And you know that it's titanium oxide. All right, it's not titanium metal. But once you light that match and you get that flame going, there's no oxygen in the flame, and everything on that match head is turning into molten stuff. All right, we were misled on the bathtub particle. It's on the Citizen Sleuth's website. There's a particle that looks like a bathtub. It's ugly looking. It doesn't look like a piece of metal. And we originally thought that this is a piece of titanium that's got kind of weird bubbly stuff on it. Now my thought is that is titanium powder that was on a match head that went molten and then solidified in the flame out of the oxygen and now looks elementally like titanium metal, but it's really not. So you see the problem. So if you say, okay, you've got titanium and antimony, very rare percentage particles, yes, rare. But if I say, well, there's a lot of titanium on the tie, which there is, and that's coming from matches, and matches have a lot of calcium along with them, you're creating molten stuff inside the flame, and now you could get a combination of calcium and titanium on the tie. And if you go look for all the calcium titanium things, you may find a whole lot of particles. See what I'm saying? If you didn't search, you're searching for antimony only. If we search for titanium, and maybe Chris is doing that right now, look for calcium titanium and see if there's a lot of other matching particle sets, and your 3 particles got identified or misidentified as SB, antimony. Now you can see how this could happen. So we're looking through a fairly small portal at this antimony size, but if it's calcium, there could be a lot more on there. Don't know. If you don't see a lot of calcium, leans way toward your thing. Not saying you're wrong, but that's how you go against it.
But I'm not understanding something here, Tom, because you strike a match and it burns, and it burns relatively randomly, presumably what it ends up. And at the end of it, so the final product is going to be probably vary from match head to match head. Fair enough. But the problem I'm still having, and maybe it's just because I've had a couple scotches tonight or whatever, but I don't think so. The problem I'm having is that at the end of the day, regardless of what you're talking about, throwing darts at a board, buying lottery tickets, or striking a match, randomness plays a part, of course. And when you have 105,000 particles and 3 particles only 3, with the 2 elements that equal roughly 100%, for those same 2 elements to be mathematically balanced of only 3 particles are literally 1,000,000 to 1. And that is what we have here with the titanium and the 3 titanium and antimony particles. So I'm having a really hard time understanding. I get the match and you strike it and the titanium oxide and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, there was no oxygen measured in any of these 3 particles. But I'm still, just as a matter of random fate, like that is an enormous coincidence. It's possible, but it's an enormous coincidence. I mean, am I wrong about that?
If you're looking at antimony, if you know for sure,
I'm looking at the balance of antimony to titanium, which are the 2 primary elements here, because you've got some nickel and stuff, which you kind of have to discount. But I mean, antimony is coming up to 17% on all 3, and there's only 3 there.
Right. But if we knew there were 100 particles and they range from titanium and calcium to 30% calcium to 10% calcium and all through the range, we don't know if there's an affinity for those 2 things to stick together in a molten flame.
That's what I was wondering, is if there's like 17%, if there's 17% titanium and whatever percent calcium elements on the tie, are there? I mean,
we don't know. Nobody's looked. We haven't taken this approach of looking at, right? And the other thing is, I can improve your odds even more, because you don't have to look at the 100,000 particles on the tie like you're using for the statistical thing. It's only the titanium particles on the tie that will be part of your statistical analysis. What's the odds on all the titanium particles on the tie? 3 of them coming up with either the antimony at 17%. So the odds are probably even higher than that. So I agree. It's weird. You have a good point.
Yeah.
I can't immediately refute it. I can say that we have to look at the bigger picture and see what the calcium titanium ratios look like. Because we could be, if it was titanium to calcium, would it look really weird that there's 17%? Maybe not, if there's a lot of them that are in that kind of range. So,
did I miss where we discussed if titanium is ever with calcium? I mean, is that ever a thing?
You just garbled. I didn't hear what
I was asking if do we have? I mean, I guess I've missed it. I've been busy, I suppose. But have we reached? I mean, is titanium ever mixed with calcium?
It would be in a match head, but not in a metal.
Yeah. Okay. So
match heads could mess us up here. We could get all kinds of things off these. I have a database from the FBI. I'm not supposed to give it out. That has analysis of 100 different match heads. It is a nightmare. Because we originally looked at this database trying to say, okay, can we sort out what all the match heads are on the tie? Because all the match particles, there is probably 70% of the particles on the tie are from matches. And this database we've got is a nightmare. You think the 100,000 particles is bad? This is way worse. So Chris, you want to take a shot at it? I can work with you on that, but I'm not going to spend my next 3 years trying to sort that out.
Yeah.
Good God.
Yeah.
It gets in the weeds here, guys. This is not easy stuff. Science is not as precise as everybody would like to think, especially what we're doing here.
And I think it's important to note, as you said, Tom, and I think we talked a little bit about on the Facebook Live earlier, is that these aren't absolutely precise. There is contamination. There is variance with respect to the equipment measuring based upon angles and things like that. So it's a little bit rough, and maybe that's a little too strong of a term, but the data is a little rough. It has a little bit of contamination kind of thrown in the mix to make it that much harder. But yeah, I mean, that's all we got to work with. And it seems to me
reliable.
Yes, I was going to just say it's pretty good nonetheless.
It's pretty good. You don't want to discount the whole thing off. If it says it's aluminum in there, probably got aluminum in there. right? If it says it's 50% aluminum, it could be 60%, it could be 40%. So the proportions I wouldn't put a lot of weight on. Within 5 or 10% probably is pretty good, right?
Yeah.
So you can count on the fact if it says aluminum, it is. If it's some exotic metal that you haven't seen before, then you got to start looking into it. But the weights, how much the percentages would be the thing that's the most off.
I realize this is Ryan's show, but
no, this is your show, right?
no. This
he
is
just
your
knew what
deal.
he was doing.
Yes.
He's just a facilitator. So
yes.
no, that's not true. So let's shift gears here and let's talk about this DNA a little bit, Tom, because and of course you and I have talked about this kind of privately, but what are your thoughts about, like, for example, the tie? Because I know you applied sticky stubs and vacuum and some other things to the tie, and you pulled off some particles from the tie. So certainly DB Cooper's DNA was part of that. Now it's been 52 years. Obviously, there's some degradation and all that type of stuff that's taken place, and many different people touched the tie, breathed on it, all that kind of stuff over 52 plus years. But having said that, how feasible is it in your mind to take, for example, a group of particles that were pulled from the front of the tie knot ideally, and have it submitted and try to splice out the DNA and figure out the separate DNA profiles? How feasible is that in your mind?
So, is it possible? Absolutely. Can we do it from our position in the world right now? Very unlikely. Very unlikely. So, when you're dealing with a crime scene, there's going to be a big DNA signal from whoever the criminal was that you're going after. If we had the cigarette butts, they would open up the filter, and certainly it would be 99% Cooper DNA in there. But when you're talking about, just a skin cell and trying to pick up something off that, well, there's most of the dust in your house is skin cells, right? Most people don't know that. So there's a ton of skin cells around, and I see them all the time on an electron microscope. The problem is when these labs will extract the DNA, it's the easiest to extract the most complete and the most abundant. So most complete, most abundant, and that's what happened on the thing with your documentary, Eric. When they put the filter in the system, they came out with the most abundant, cleanest hit, which happened to be me. Cooper is going to be 50 years degraded, like you said, right? The DNA actually fragments into other pieces. It breaks down into pieces. So the idea that 50 years later you're going to get a complete, clean, super, count of Cooper's DNA is it's going to be rough. I'm not saying it's impossible, but we know it's way worse than mine or Alan Stone's or Carol Arbazinskis or Larry's car DNA, which is all sitting there right next to him. We're complete strings, and there's a bunch of little other strings laying around from Cooper and everybody else that's ever been in the parachute or anything else. You have to figure out a way to make those little bitty strings into complete strings if you want to get a complete sequence that's going to tell you a lot. Now, can you do that? Yes, it's possible. And I happen to know it's possible because I have good friends that are in the ancient DNA business. They're trying to currently bring back the passenger pigeon. Personal friend of mine, his project, bring back the passenger pigeon. And he is fighting an uphill battle, and he's got dead passenger pigeons to work with.
Right.
He's got dead passenger pigeons. So
he's got multiple samples. He's got multiple samples of the passenger pigeon. Okay.
Yes. And he says it's going to take probably 100 generations of him breeding pigeons to bring back the passenger pigeon. God. And he said that's why the mastodon thing is not going to happen. He said they don't breed fast enough for them to work through the DNA. You don't take the DNA and there's no complete profile. You can't take the complete profile, stick it in an egg, and come out with a passenger pigeon. So what you got to do is work the profile segments into modern DNA and kind of push the modern DNA out, and hopefully you end up with a complete sequence of older DNA with the little gaps filled in with modern DNA. You can kind of understand how that would happen. And it doesn't happen all at once. So what we did one time is I was involved in a huge argument about whether or not there was organic tissues from dinosaurs preserved in the bones. And I was arguing it was bacteria. Everybody said, no, it's not. It's thing. If you Google it, you'll see it's still around on the internet. So I hooked up with my friend Ben, who's doing the passenger pigeon, and what he did with his group was we took some dinosaur bone and we put it in the grinder, we called it, and we took that dinosaur bone and poured the whole dinosaur bone into this machine, and it reassembled the DNA from all the DNA that's in there. Bacteria, worms, birds, fish, everything that's in there, it would reassemble it. It's called metagenomics. So as you can imagine, if you cut up a book, all right, you're not cutting up one book, you're cutting up a bunch of the same book randomly. You make random cuts in this thing. You can piece sentences together based on the overlap. All right. If you see a sentence that overlaps with another sentence, you can eventually piece the whole book back together. That's what this machine does. It pieces overlapping segments of DNA that match, and they go by templates and stuff. They kind of, I don't know all the details, not my field, but you can understand what I'm saying. They can reassemble the DNA based on overlapping sequences, and they can get most of a sequence back. Now, Cooper's DNA is going to be busted up like that. And this is the way to put Cooper's DNA back together and end up with something we can read that's substantial enough that we can do some, what they call it, the genealogy stuff.
Yeah.
What I don't want to do,
forensic genealogy.
Forensic genealogy. What I don't want to do is give up the only samples we have that I have of Cooper's DNA and waste them on a single hit. We're going to find whoever's the best DNA on this thing, and that's going to be Cooper. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And I'll announce now that I have got sticky tape, like Scotch tape, that I've taken off of Cooper's tie. They've been in plastic boxes since we did it. And I'm willing to donate one of those to Pat or her group or whoever can come up with a DNA team that will guarantee we're going to get more than 5 sequences off that tape. Because if they don't come up with 5, you're going to get me, Carol, Alan, whatever. You're only going to get the 5 guys that last touched that thing. And we all know who those were when it comes to the tie. Even Brian might be on there, right? So
yeah.
Which will completely convict his father. We knew he was involved.
Here we go again.
I'll interject here that the problem I've always had with the tie is that, once we get into the FBI files now, my God, we see that thing, they put that thing in the mail, like in the regular mail, like, and just sent it back and forth. When they were investigating a suspect in LA in 1974, they put it in the mail and shipped it over to LA because LA wanted to show it to the ex-wife of this person, right? And say, was this his tie or whatever, right? And it ended up sitting, they had it for like 4 months. We have where LA received it, the LA office of the FBI received it. And then they did, and then the next thing is they go and talk to this guy's ex-wife, and she goes, I've never seen that before in my life. Like 4 or 5 months later. So they let it just sit in their office, just sitting there, I'm guessing, for 4 or 5 months. And then they put it back in an envelope and send it back to Seattle. And
you know how unimportant you're making me feel at this point, Ryan? Like, you're talking about this thing getting tossed around in the mail. I'm literally filing suit in federal court to get access for a few minutes, and the judge says no. It's unbelievable how ridiculous this has gotten.
They were very flippant with it. Like I said, I actually counted up for my book. I counted up the number of times, at least in the files that we've seen. I'm sure it's more, but they sent it first to, let's see. So this is the sequence of it for those who would be interested. And if I can do this off memory, I'm a Cooper weirdo, so I might can do this, but I'm pretty sure. Okay. So they get it off the plane in Reno. It goes to Vegas. Okay. Vegas agents take it to the local pennies there in Vegas and say, hey, what is this? And those agents say, hey, this is a tie. We don't sell these anymore. They're for bus boys, whatever, yada, yada. All that stuff we've seen, right? Then they put it in the mail to Portland. Portland shows it to their local pennies. They take it to pennies and say, hey, who would have bought this tie recently or whatever, and they go, well, we haven't sold those in a couple of years. Okay. Then they send it to Seattle, and Seattle does the same thing. Okay. Then Seattle sits on it for a few months. Then they put it in the mail to the crime lab, send it across the country to look for fluids. Okay. Because apparently, they could back then, they did have the technology. This was kind of news to me, but they did have the technology to lift blood samples and be able to tell what type of blood the person had, right? So if there had been saliva or blood on the tie that they had seen that they could have lifted back then, they could have tested it and determined what blood type the person had, I guess, if there was blood on it. But no fluids on the tie. So they sent it back to, Seattle. Then in 74, Seattle sends it to LA. LA sends it back to Seattle. Then nothing happens to it. And then in 2001, I think, Ralph Hope has it sent back to the crime lab for the DNA testing, right? And then they did the DNA testing, and then they sent it back to Seattle. And then, the next thing we know, Larry's handling it on, Brian Ingram's. I think Brian told me on the phone today that he handled the tie with you guys. So Brian was there too. Tom, you may have forgotten that. But
that's why I just said Brian's DNA is probably on there too. No, I said
you mentioned Brian yourself. Yeah. Brian. So yeah, I mean, this thing's been back and forth a lot.
So you got to get 14. If you want to have any chance, you got to 10 or 12 DNA things to get rid of all these people, right? We all got to go get DNA tested.
Let's talk about something while we're on the subject of this. Let's kind of get into something that's actually really kind of cool with this, Tom. Settle this once and for all. Did you guys secretly disassemble the tie knot?
We tried. We tried. We could not.
Tried is that's like a lawyer's word.
No, I'm not being lawyery. You know me. I'm straight up, man. If I could have, I would have.
What happened? Did you disassemble it?
So we realized that inside the tie knot there would be skin flakes and stuff from Cooper, right? We were on this. This was trip 1, the first trip. So we thought, okay, we've got to like scrape something out of the knot. So I looked at the knot very closely, and the pin that you're interested in on the back, it's being held together by it's like a washer that only goes on one way. Is the best way to describe it. So it presses on easily, but you can't get it off. And I looked at that. I thought, I could get this off if I had a pliers, but I knew I'd destroy it getting it off, right? So I said, okay, we got to leave this alone. So we said, okay, we've got to scrape the tie to see if we can get some stuff out of it. So we had a little probe and stuff like this. So we went to the corner of the room, right? We went to the very corner. It probably looked really weird on the cameras. They had us on camera 24/7, right? So we all piled into the corner of the room. We're trying to not let any stuff come in, right? And we got the tie like this, and Al's holding a little box, and I'm scraping stuff out of here. Larry's looking over it too, right? He's like, we're going to get something out of here. So, yeah, we tried really hard to get something out of the tie. And then when we went back to do the second test years later, we used the vacuum in the knot, and that's where the filters came.
Okay. Yeah. So hold on a second, Tom, because this is Ryan's show. We're going to make this is going to be news breaking and exciting here. This is going to be, we're giving the Kardashians a run for the money here. So you're telling me that you didn't actually disassemble the tie knot. You tried, but you didn't because you didn't have pliers. But I
didn't try it. I looked at it. Yeah.
Okay. I asked this very same question to Jeffrey Gray, and Jeffrey Gray said that yes, the tie was disassembled. One of you ain't telling the truth. What's going on?
Go ask Al. Go ask Carol. Go ask Larry. Larry was there. Ask Larry. Go drinking with Larry and ask him. Get him drunk, and then he'll give you the straight story.
Larry's the FBI guy. It's not going to be. It's going to be like the company line. Of course, they didn't disassemble the tie.
I don't think you could put it. I don't think you could put that thing back together, right? Well, you look. I can prove it to you. I can prove it to you right now. You go look at the pictures of the tie, right?
Yes, it's very tightly clasped.
It's very tightly clasped, and you look to see if that ring on the back that goes on one way is still intact. If it's intact, then I didn't take it apart and put it back together again.
So Jeffrey Gray is embellishing to make it sound like
the media.
You guys got it.
Yeah, the author is embellishing.
The media.
So this is a matter that's been finally settled. The tie was not disassembled. You kind of looked at it, you probed, and it didn't work. But nonetheless, you did probe the tie. But the tie knot has not been disassembled. So that is now official.
If I had disassembled it, I would have taken pictures of it.
Yeah.
Right. I have pictures of everything else that we did. Right. You saw the whole thing. Yeah. Pictures from everything going on. If I took that thing apart, I would absolutely have pictures of it.
But
I
why
wish I
would you
did.
do that if you're like in the corner of the room hiding from the camera? Like, why
No,
would
we
you
were doing that
file
because we were scraping it. And we didn't want to get any dust in there along from the vents. It was the air conditioning was blowing constantly at that point.
Oh my
that's
God! Well, it sounds like a hot mess. But okay. Well, that's actually new, pertinent information,
Yeah.
and it's worth. If 50 years from now people are still trying to figure out the case and we're all dead and gone, maybe Ryan's gonna be still alive because he's young enough. They're going to be looking at this thing, debating whether the tie knot was taken apart, and they're going to be able to look at this conversation and say, you know what? It was not taken apart. They looked at it. It wasn't taken apart. So if we can actually disassemble it now in the year 2171 or whatever it is, maybe there's something in there.
There
we
has
can
to be
figure out.
a ton of skin particles in there. If you could give me, if you could undo that tie knot and get a sample out of the middle of that, especially if you did somebody reputable, I would say, okay, send it to anybody you want. They'll get a clean Cooper profile.
So Tom,
Disgusting. Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of people are surprised about is that the other sources of DNA potentially are the shroud lines, right? I mean, because we have to think about what did Cooper touch. We know he touched the boarding pass, but that thing's been passed around a lot. I know that because even the FBI said that in the files, the FBI tried to fingerprint his boarding pass, and they're like, this thing's been touched by everybody and anybody. There's too many fingerprints on it, so there's probably too much, But the shroud lines, though, to cut through the shroud lines, Cooper had to grip, the shroud lines to get enough tension to cut. I would suspect, right? And so that's going to be pulling off skin cells just doing that.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so, and I don't think that cannibalized parachute has been nearly passed around as much as like the tie would be, right? That thing probably did sit in a box for most of the time.
Mine's on there, Carol's on there, Alan's on there. We all picked up the knots and we're looking at the knots and the whole thing. Right. So that's all still on there. Carol counted all the shroud lines, and there was some missing more than there was told in the 302s.
It was about 90 feet, you said, right? Was what you
whatever Carol said. I wasn't, Carol did it and she was being very thorough about it. I think it's on our website somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's about 90 feet.
Yeah.
Which is what
yes, the shroud lines are good. If I was going to approach the shroud lines, I do a DNA sample for every shroud line.
Yeah.
All right. If you did a DNA sample on every shroud line, hopefully there's one that overlaps on all of them, and that would be most likely your Cooper guy.
Right. And we have a question here, Tom. Somebody said, could you ask Tom if the huge amount of salt on Cooper's tie could come from the salt trucks that drop salt where it snows?
Good question. Don't know. Never analyzed the salt against the salt on his tie. We do know that from the family tree we did that the common salts you get at the supermarket do not match the salt on the tie.
Now, it's my understanding that in metallurgy they do use salt as I don't know what the term is, but a mixer or something.
Salts come up all the time in all kinds of processes, and there's salt being used in the Hunter process in making titanium. That's what
the Hunter process. Yeah, that's what it was. And also, for example, just doing, which is what Vincent Peterson did, was corrosive testing. Because these are planes flying over salt seas and things, and they have to test. Do these metals corrode with salt or whatever? So I think salt is a big deal. I think
so. Somebody could do that research. You don't need instrumentation to do that research now, because we know what the elemental breakdown is of the salt from the tie. So you could go look. They would have elemental breakdowns of all the salts wherever they're used. So somebody could just go do a little history search. I see Eric's perking right up here right now.
But hold on a second, Tom, because I've thought about this very thing, and I'm surprised you're saying this because I've never seen it. Where is there a precise elemental breakdown for the salt? I've never seen anything.
I've got it. I've got it in my. I don't think it's published on the website, but I have it. We have elemental signatures on a bunch of the salt particles.
Then, so in what form is it in, this data?
Same as all the other stuff, all the other elemental forms.
So you can send this to me?
Yeah.
Because that's actually really, really important. That's critical. I've wondered about that, but I'm like, well, I guess no specific analysis has been done of the grains of salt, but I also figured the salt as well is obviously going to be on the carbon stubs. But if you can send me those if you can send me some of that elemental analysis, I will run that by Crucible, and let's just see what we come up with. Because I would love to see if there's some sort of match, or perhaps there is no match that can be derived between the hot salt stress corrosion testing and what was found on the tie.
Yeah, no,
So-
we can do that. So just so you guys all know, and the audience knows too, whenever you see any of my family tree stuff, I've showed family trees a lot. Anytime you have one particle being compared to another, you had to have an elemental spectrum about it, right? So everything you see on my 700 particle family tree has got a good spectral analysis connected with it. The same as all the Macron stuff has got a spectral analysis. Macron only goes deep into 3 particles. My stuff would generally be a little more refined than that. But yeah, just so you know.
That's beautiful. That's really, really valuable, Tom. That's I'm learning something huge right here. This is huge. This is really, really big. Because I've had this discussion with, the Department of Transportation with the state of Connecticut on this type of salt they use, comes from Chile. All kinds of stuff, having no idea that you actually had this analysis. So this is great. We're going to have the DB Cooper case solved within a month.
All right. Knock it out, Eric. Knock it out of the park, man.
I'm teasing. I'm kidding. So.
I'm right behind it. No, because, curiously, the Cooper salt came out matching, or very close match, or a closer match to the titanium processing salt, right? Which it's the back of my head. I can't unstick it from the
RMI.
idea that Cooper had something to do with RMI. Yeah, exactly. RMI is the one that did the Hunter process, and they used sodium and that turns sodium chloride is what came out. Yeah. So if you can find a match on that, even if you can eliminate all the road salts, I don't know if they come from Chile, but if there's a common thing that they use for road salts, I think it's got magnesium in it. Then we could eliminate. Nice to eliminate road salt. Didn't do that in my initial investigation.
Okay, to Tom, we have a question here. I'm gonna put it up there. It says, I'm a complete nobody, but the particles from match strikes seem fairly implausible to me. I understand it creates doubt, but it sounds like DB Cooper would have had to strike like 500,000 matches near it. That doesn't. That's wrong, right? Or
well, each match will produce hundreds of particles.
Yeah.
Right. Each match will produce hundreds of. How many matches in a book? 20.
Yes.
Let's say 20.
Yeah.
That's 2,000 particles per match book. And these guys that chain smoke back then I'm sure they go through a book every day or two.
Oh God. Yeah. Like,
so inside of a year, you could get, let's say, I don't know, 50 match. That's 2,000 times 50 is 100,000 particles on the tie.
A lot of Raleigh coupons too. That's a lot of.
So yeah, you could easily get a lot of particles.
Terrible joke.
Well, match particles are a big enough deal that the FBI did a big study on it and analyzed a ton of different matches, trying to be able to match up to what type of stuff was what.
Wow.
So that's how big a deal it is.
Tom, I'm not sure if you saw the post today that I made on the Facebook group about this Dr. James Roman character, who's an very interesting individual. He was a NASA medical researcher, later became an MD.
Oh, I did see that one.
Yeah,
yes,
later,
I saw that one.
Yeah, later he killed his wife's lover, killed her, and then killed himself. When the FBI showed up to his house outside Washougal in 1980, he killed himself. But the sheriff's department found dynamite and blasting caps and forgery documents and all these creepy things buried in his barn, right? Of this house he built in 1972, after being a resident. And I know residents don't make any money at all. It's my understanding. But the question I was asking, this guy worked with NASA and he worked at Air Force bases and things like this throughout the 60s. Is there any possibility that the tie particles could come from NASA type? It is aerospace, right?
I don't know. Were they using aluminum? Were they using titanium in the space stuff? Was the space industry using titanium?
I would imagine so, right? Maybe not. That's a good question.
Maybe, because they usually use leading edge stuff. That's typical.
Yeah, I would think that
surely
if like the Concorde had titanium, then surely the friggin' lunar
the military was using it, so they had a pretty good database on it at that point. So I would think that they would be using it, but I don't ever remember you know, I don't ever remember hearing titanium discussed as part of a space thing, any kind of thing.
What about medical equipment back then? Anything titanium related there?
You know, I don't know that there's a lot of titanium used like in joints and stuff today,
Yeah.
but you know, I doubt it would have been that far developed back then. And prosthetics and stuff were not a thing in the 1970s.
Yeah, not the way that we think of, and that is the thing about the titanium that folks don't realize is that titanium is rather ubiquitous these days, but
Yeah,
back then it just
you
wasn't.
can't compare it.
Yeah, it's
Very
not
rare back
comparable.
then. That's our biggest break was that titanium leaf spring looking thing. That was a huge break.
But
You
the
know?
bathtub particle?
No, the one that looks like a leaf spring. It's a long skinny thing. It looks like I call it a leaf spring. It's got layers in it.
Okay.
But
You're
it's
talking
on
about
the
the
website.
bar.
Looks
The
like a bar,
bar.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
not a squared up
titanium
bar.
Different layers, almost like it's like it's literally layered, like a coating or something. Kind of weird, yeah.
Yeah, so,
You know, I should take another look at that one under my better microscope now, under my better SEM. It may show better those layers.
now what about the
layers would tell us something.
what about the gold on the tie? You know that I mean.
Oh yeah, glad we should talk about it. Is everybody hanging in here? We still got.
Oh yeah, we have 31, and we have infinity and beyond.
Gold thing, right? Yeah. So I'll back Eric up a little bit here. He says, okay, the tie clip it was spent a lot of time on the tie, right? That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. But it's always a but. There's a tie pin hole that's got an indent around it that I think it was spent more time with a tie pin or a tie tack. They call them a tack or a pin.
Tie tack, yeah.
Tie tack. I think it spent more time with the tie tack than it did with the clip that we know today. Now, we did find gold particles on the tie, right? And that's indicative because the tie clip is gold plated. So if you take the little points of that alligator clip and stuff and you rub them against that tie, you'll wipe off gold particles on there. So I was not surprised to find gold. When we originally found it, I thought, oh, cool, gold. And then it occurred to me, oh, probably came off the tie clip. So yeah, the fact there are gold particles on there means that tie clip didn't show up on there the day that Cooper jumped, right? They had to be a kind of a common part of the wardrobe to have enough gold particles on there that I was able to find them.
But now
remember, I only find 1 or 2% of what's on there.
But now that wouldn't come from the the tie clip itself. I mean, those things were like sold for like $3. Those were really cheap. I mean, that wouldn't be real gold. I wouldn't think, right?
It is real gold.
It is real.
It's gold plated, yeah.
Okay.
You remember I brought mine and you actually analyzed it right there on the spot. It was like 14 karat gold or something. Remember we ran it through your machine.
Yeah, I don't remember that by hand, but if I did, I stand by my word, right?
Yeah, no. For those who are listening, I visited Tom at his home in Sierra Vista, and I have the alligator tie clip, and we actually put it in the thing the SEM to analyze it, and it took about 5 or 10 minutes, as I recall, and it came back, and it was 14. It was like 14 karat gold. Which surprised me because I wasn't sure, but it wasn't even 10 karat. I recall it being like 14 karat gold, respectable. Yeah, so that's correct. Yeah, absolutely, it is real gold, plated.
Yeah, plated. Yeah. So that's all. That's very normal. That's very normal. But yeah, we should. If we're looking at pictures of Cooper wearing a tie, and I have one here. What did I do with that? I have a great. Of course, I can't find it now. Oh yeah, here it is. Here, share screen once again. Wait a minute.
All right.
Copy. Share my screen once again. I just gave a talk in my town library here last week, and this is the picture I used, and I said, hold on, let me get back on the thing here. Can you see this? I said, this is DB Cooper, right? This is who I think DB Cooper is. If you look at this guy, he's in the shop. He's supervising some stuff going on with some metalworking stuff. He's wearing the white lab coat, and you can see that the lab coat's dirty. So he spends all his time out there, right? You know, he is not a stranger to this shop. He's not really super involved, but he's on top of whatever the hell's going on, and his tie is sticking out. Right? So in my mind, this is Cooper right here. This is Cooper.
That
That looks remarkably like Vince Peterson, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we do have. Yeah, I mean, we have the. We have that footage. It's not Rim Crew, but we have the footage, and I've shown it often of of these guys. They're pulling ingots out of a fire. These metallurgists, and they have their clip-on ties are right there, right next to all these sparking material flying everywhere, and it's like, well, but I think the thing that really was interesting was, Tom, where you said at CooperCon that the thin part of the tie on the back had the most particles. Is that right? Or had the most?
No, had the grease stuff. Killed my share screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the back part of the tie, the inner part of the tie had the smears on it, which was crazy. I was just thrown for such a loop on that. I couldn't believe it. The only thing I can think, and I said this at CooperCon, is that he had crap on his fingers and grabbed his tie and wiped his fingers off or something.
Huh.
I don't know. Again, it's every.
Let me ask you this, Tom, about, because we're kind of going back about the tie tack hole. And I actually recently looked at it again, and there are two holes, would appear to be holes in the tie from a tie tack or something like it. And the larger hole, to me, doesn't look like a tie tack. It actually looks like a burn. It looks like an ember or something. And if you look at it, it just looks like it's sort of cratered into the polyester and kind of melted in there. The other thing is, if you measure the hole, it's 3/8 of an inch wide. It is a very wide hole. So yes, it's 3/8 of an inch. So it isn't near the center of the tie, which would sort of seem to indicate it was a tie tack. But just given the width and just the appearance, how certain are you that is a tie tack, or is it possible that it's just a random ember from, like, for example, what Ryan discussed, or maybe lighting a match head and you have a random piece of the match head that just sort of lands in the middle of the tie there? I mean, are you certain it's a tie tack?
I'm certain that I'm not certain. So
okay. Because there are two of them. There's one that's much smaller, which I think could be a tie tack, tie pin hole or whatever. But the larger one, boy, that kind of looks like a burn mark to me.
If it's that big, that is suspicious.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the UV picture offhand. I'm not finding it offhand. It would be Seattle trip 2, Seattle 2011. Okay, hold on. I'll bring it up here. Yeah. Okay. So I want to bring it up and share screen here.
Okay.
All right. Share screen.
Yep.
There we go. Yep.
So, in looking at this, let me get my screen back up. So what I would say, can you see my cursor? Is my cursor coming up on the screen?
Yep.
It is? Okay. So you're saying this is one hole over here to the left, right? Is that the one you're saying is the other hole?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And then this one you think is a burn mark. Well,
it appears to be a burn mark because it looks like it, plus it's 3/8 of an inch. And the way I know that is I actually counted the number of threads. You zoom in, you can actually count the threads wide, and I have a similar tie, so I came up with 3/8 of an inch wide at its widest part, and it just looks like a hot ember kind of melted or cratered into it. You see what I'm saying? Like it's cindered kind of thing. You can see, you can count the threads wide.
It's a nylon tie, right? It's not a cotton tie. It's an acrylic or is it acrylic?
Polyester.
Polyester. Okay, so sure. Polyester should melt. So yes. Polyester should melt like plastic. So this should be all plastic balls if it was heated up.
Well, it looks like it has. It looks like something landed there and it kind of settled in and melted down a little bit. I mean, obviously it's not a flame. It's like a little flame, but it does look like something settled in there and kind of like created a divot, like on the moon or something.
Where is that on the tie, actually? Like where on the tie?
It's where you'd expect it. Front
center.
Front center did. Because that might be the tie pin is what we're saying. if that's what that might be.
Yeah, it's kind of where you'd expect the tie pin to be. Let me see if I've got a complete tie. Okay, here. I'll bring
I
this
think
over
you do, and you
here.
can actually see it. It's somewhere on there. I can't off the
It's
top
right.
of my head.
It's right. I think it's right about here. I think that's it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of near the bottom, actually, and that's kind of beneath where a coat would cover it up.
That
Well,
is,
that's
it
where
is
you'd
beneath
expect to put a tie
yeah.
tack, though.
But why would you have a tie tack so low, where nobody could see it? What's the point?
No, you're clipping the back.
Good, that's a good argument too. I don't know.
Out.
Yeah. Wow.
You know.
I mean, yeah. But I thought the tie clip was to keep the. I mean, tie tacks are ornamental, aren't they?
No, they go through this. They go through the backside too to keep it all together.
Oh, okay. Well, I use a tie clip for that. That's what I would use a tie clip for, is to keep the pieces together. But that's
well, I guess I'm certainly not positive if a tie tack was ornamental or not. So you could argue.
Here's the thing: is like the only reason you would. There's no need to use a tie tack to keep it all together because it has that tag in the back, and it's designed to actually slip the smaller portion of the tie into that little tag in the back, so it actually holds the big flap and the small flap together.
Okay.
Right.
You don't have to put anything there. I mean, I've tried it. I've seen it. It's designed to do that, to hold those two flaps together. I know that's not.
And I can't recall if that jewelry. I've got one. It's not. If I was at my office, I could look at it. Eric has one too. The Stacy, whatever the tie clip came in.
Alligator tie clip.
Did that come with a tie tack as well?
Yes, it did.
I thought so.
Yes,
yeah.
it did.
Well, maybe measure maybe the tack against the hole. Maybe we'll see. So also I want to point out that you see all this crap on the knot here. This is probably all match particles right up in here. See that? Right in there.
Really?
Yeah, all match particles.
Oh, because I'm trying to think if you have a tie on, I guess you're striking a match at that level.
Yeah, you're lighting your cigarette and then you're putting your tie on while you're getting ready for work.
Here's the thing, Tom, and this is where I think it's I mean, the only thing that proves or appears to prove or indicate is that DB Cooper was striking matches. Like it could have been, for example, I brought up the whole idea of a guy working in a lab striking a Bunsen burner. You're still striking matches. I mean, I remember I asked you once, did you find anything on the tie that's indicative of tobacco, a cigarette or whatever? And you said you weren't looking for that. So we don't really know. But, I mean, this is one of those cases where maybe we should be a little careful. DB Cooper did smoke on the jet. Let's be clear about that. But, there is an abundant amount of match head debris on there. But that's just, again, a maitre d' at a restaurant would strike a lot of matches as well, lighting candles before every evening. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the guy was smoking like a chimney.
There's the tag Q40. Q41 Q40 is the tie, and Q41 people is the name that the FBI gave to the tie clip. That's the tie clip's tag. So
it shows you where all the sample points came from, right? This is all
the stubs.
This is where the stub was stuck on the tie, so it's picking up particles from each of these places, and each stub is numbered.
So these stubs are a lot smaller than I thought.
They're 1/2 inch.
Okay.
And if you see, they got a number on them.
Oh, so that actually is the stub, right? That is what that is.
That is the stub. Yeah, you see the numbers, right? 663. So this is how you got to keep track of stuff, right? If you don't do this, the smears would have been nothing if they didn't turn out to be from this back half of the tie. That's really strange.
Yeah, I mean, I guess here's what I would say, Tom, is that if you need to wipe your hands on something, you wipe it on the back tail of the tie because that's not visible. So if he's got greasy hands,
it also says he wasn't wearing a white lab coat because he certainly wiped it on the lab coat first.
Could have, yeah, or maybe he didn't, or maybe he just didn't want his lab coat to. Well, I guess nobody cares if lab coats are clean or in that setting.
Here's what we did when we went back to get the tie the second time. I think we were loaded for bear there, right?
Was there a COVID outbreak back?
So you see these things down here. These are all the filters that we used.
Yeah.
And then these are the stub boxes.
Yeah. So 2011 was the year, August 18, 2011. I was confused if it was 11 or 13. So 11 settles it. Okay.
11, yeah. 11.
No, but now I'm trying to remember. Now didn't y'all have access earlier than that? Like, weren't y'all doing stuff in like 2008?
Yes, this is the second trip.
Yeah.
So we made the trip specifically to sample the tie because we knew how important the tie was. Thank God we did it because Eng's not there anymore. And that was our he was very cooperative considering. And had we waited any longer, we would have lost access altogether, like what Eric's fighting with.
Yeah, Ing gets some grief for buying into Marla. But here's the thing. I mean, look, if Tina Mucklow, we have the FBI file now that says where Tina Mucklow was shown a picture of LD and said, that's as close as I've ever seen to him. Right. Well, and so that means something if you're the FBI, right? To them at least. And I think that people can say, oh, Ing was interested, whatever for other reasons. But I think that says something that Tina was interested in LD's picture, at least so, they can be forgiven for thinking that, at the time, for being interested in LD at the time, and Marla passed lie detector tests, which people bring that up. And I'm like, look, that just means that she believed what she believed when you pass a lie detector test, right? It's not, it's not verifying the truth. It's verifying the truth in your mind, which is what we're looking at with that stuff. But no, Ing gets some grief from some people, but Ing has always seemed fine to me. He's very unemotive, I guess, but that's a lot of the FBI when you talk to them.
Well, he's in private practice now, so he's
all those guys. Yeah, all those guys. I think the FBI, they push you out when you turn 55, maybe, or maybe 56, whatever age Larry was last year. Is when they gave Larry the boot there.
Yeah, it was like 50. He was a young guy, 55. That's right.
Yeah, he's a kid. he's the kid there.
For Tom and me, for young,
look,
like
so
Ryan.
Another thing that if because we're talking about, I titled this, we're discussing new developments, and one of the things that you discussed at CooperCon was the fact that we believe now through your analysis that the money when it got waterlogged was probably not mud water. It wasn't flood water, is what you assume, correct?
Well, that's another thing that, Eric and I have been looking at from two different sides of the fence.
Sure.
Now, so my original thinking, based on my history, not based on facts, was that when you have a flood, you have silty water. All right. And so I looked at the money and I didn't see any silt. So I said, okay, it probably wasn't buried in a flood, right? That goes against what Eric was thinking. But I think it was you, Eric. Did you bring it up, that fact that, well, most of these floods come from snow melt?
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh, I shouldn't say that, but I said, heck.
It doesn't matter.
I said,
who would have thought that Tom would have been one that wrecked
I said, he's got a point there, right? He's got a point. Okay. Yeah, I'll buy the fact that snow melt's coming down with clean water. You got me on that one. Mm-hmm. So somebody's just got to do a little bit of research and find out the clarity of there's probably a graph somewhere that shows clarity during flood events. Somebody's got to do a clarity analysis and see what the story is. So yeah. My theory could get pushed aside. Eric could move right to the front there. And
well, but I've never seen flood waters that look clean. They're always.
Neither have I. That's why I was going to. But I've never seen a glacial flood either. So.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think what's really fascinating too, I think the thing that really blew me away with your presentation was, could you bring up the graphic? Do you have that on there of where the particles were? I'm not particles, of where the diatoms were. Yeah, with the rubber bands. If you can bring that up, that was really fascinating to where you could literally. And I actually had a phone call with Brian Ingram today, and I mentioned this to Brian, and Brian was talking about it. He was like, oh, so Tom verified basically that there were rubber bands, because he was going, Brian's thinking like, I know there were rubber bands because I saw them, but part of me second guesses what I saw when I was 8 years old or whatever,
Sure. You know what? That's how you know Brian's legit, right?
Yeah, no, Brian is honest, isn't it?
Brian, we love you. Is he on with us right now?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But no, we love Brian.
Is this, yeah, if he ever sees this recording, he's made a lot of this possible. He gave me those fragments. He could have sold those fragments for a bunch of money. He's getting requests for even the fragments. So, he's been a great contributor. So is this the graph you're talking about?
Yes.
Share screen?
Yeah, this is it for sure. Yeah, I'm interested in this one. I think this one's really fascinating that you can basically see kind of where the rubber bands would have been compressing. Because like if people can imagine a packet of money with two rubber bands on each side, actually, I've got a graphic of what I think the Cooper money. This is the best I can come up with. See if you can see that graphic there. That is really close to what I think the Cooper money looked like. You've got rubber bands on the sides with a paper strap somewhere in the middle there. How many packets were in each bundle? We don't know, 3 to 5, whatever. But this looks like 5 packet bundles in this photograph here, Tom. I'm not sure if you can see that picture there, but I think
I definitely see it, and that's exactly what my analysis was on the
right there
thing.
you just had it.
No, I think I came to a final conclusion. Maybe I didn't. Okay. Well, yeah, the idea being that, yes, I agree wholeheartedly that your stuff was probably the right deal there.
Yeah. And so if you go back to that thing, if we go back to the one with the lines where you can see
one second. Let me get to the lines. I thought I had this is the one I'm thinking of. That's was my conclusion too. So
yeah, there we go. And that's because, and so the thought is that the diatoms were less likely to infiltrate the areas where the money would have been squeezed tighter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. And talking about,
it also explains why you get 3 bundles together without a bag, right?
Yeah,
if the
right.
rubber bands were still intact, you'd hold 3 bundles together with rubber bands like that.
Yeah, but they weren't. And I asked Brian that again today, because I'm finally getting around to writing the demonic Tina Barr chapter of my book. I hate Tina Barr people. I can't stand it. It's so confusing to me. But I have to write a chapter. I've actually considered. I'm like, can I just leave this out of my D.B. Cooper book? I don't want to talk about it. But I'm finally getting around to talking about it. And so I called Brian, and Brian specifically remembers basically reaching in. It wasn't a hole, he said. It was, because he was pulling them out of the ground. So it wasn't like there was a hole, right? But he remembers 3 different times pulling out. So each packet was individual in there. Now they were laying on top of each other, but he said that they were kind of like, catacornered a little bit. They weren't, like they weren't neatly stacked, but you wouldn't expect neatly stacked. And anyway, and I've done experiments where, I've gotten a bundle from the bank and I threw it. I just rolled it along the ground in my house, and they were already the packets were already shifting. Rubber bands aren't going to hold them perfectly tight like that.
So we found that in that one example, in the example that I showed in the thing where it's got, we know that they were sideways from the previous example, if I can find it here. So yeah, it all kind of fits together and makes sense, right?
Yeah, that we've got, that basically, and it all kind of verifies that, it was in these bricks, because if you look at this photo here, we have Jack Olmsted, Cooper passenger. He talked about, he said the woman was carrying what looked to him like a pillowcase with bricks inside of it, right? He said, and then we've got Bill Grinnell, who was there at CooperCon. He said in his lap, he said it felt like that there were bricks in the bag, right? So they weren't, they were bundled together. We definitely know that, but again, they shift over time. I mean, and the rubber bands, like I said, Brian barely remembers rubber bands at all. He's questioning himself, but
but it was in the 302s, I think it was.
No, actually, that's the fascinating part about it, is that rubber bands are never actually mentioned in the 302s. We've looked for it, and that was the whole with Eric. We got into it about the bank type band stuff, right? But I mean, but that's because they never say there's rubber bands. But again, we talked to the bank, and they said, well, yeah, of course it was rubber banded. And again, every other hijacking I've seen, I wish I had those photos, but I mean, every other all the other ransom money that I've seen is always bundled together like that. And it is
You know
always
what's you know what's interesting about this, Tom, is that if that research that you showed is valid, that clearly indicates that the rubber bands had maintained their integrity to the degree where it could pinch the bills together months.
When it
While they
got
were
wet.
wet. Yeah.
when it got wet.
Months after. What's that?
Yeah, when it got wet. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, 7 months later, in the spring of 72, in the earliest situation there.
That's a good thought.
Now,
Chris.
Now, on the other hand, we know that rubber bands under normal conditions lose their integrity after a few months, certainly 6 months. So wouldn't this seem to support the whole notion that the bills actually were buried before they were exposed? Because then essentially the rubber bands and everything are protected, and they're maintaining their integrity basically in a oxygen deprived environment, dark, no UV, that kind of thing. And then they're exposed to the river in let's say June of 72. Because again, it's very hard to explain if the money was sort of exposed to the elements since November of 71.
But that would be floodwater, though, Eric, right? I mean,
That's correct. Yes.
Yes, that kind of.
Yeah, because I mean, again, according to what Tom's showing here, those bands were still tightly securing the packets.
Well, not this one
later until spring.
Not the one that we're showing here. This band is broken and twisted. That had to happen before it got buried.
Wait. Okay, so what are we looking at?
So this means that there was a band over on the left-hand side here. Can you see my cursor? There was a band on the left-hand side holding this together. There was no band over here.
Yes.
Because these were all locked in place after the burial. Because we found fragments of this see this corner up here? Those are all locked in place from the burial. They're not moving after the burial. So this shows that the bands were not intact on this particular bundle because they were skewed. They were skewed and they're still loose.
Couple of questions. First of all, how do you know you're not dealing with two separate packets, just one packet askew to the relative to the one beneath it? And then the second thing is that what you showed with the two ends sort of being clipped together. I think that's what you just showed. Yeah. Like that obviously, at least in the case of that individual packet, those ends were clipped together when they were exposed to spring or summer diatoms, which clearly was months later. So, I mean, therefore, it's reasonable to deduce that they were somehow protected. The rubber bands were somehow protected for at least 6 or 7 months to be exposed to the spring water, regardless of whether it was some guy dipping it in the river or it was the flood water, which is what I think it was related to, or some other scenario, right? I mean,
it would point to an early burial, not a multi-year later burial. It probably happened like we were all saying within the first year, within the first few months between November the jump, and they probably got buried that spring.
But again, my point though is that, well, let me just ask you this. If, let's just say, and maybe you don't know the answer, but let's say the money was sitting in the bag, and the bank bag is sitting on the side of the river for 7 months till June of 72.
Was it wet?
Well, obviously it rained and stuff during that period of time, so
but it wasn't being inundated by the river water.
That's correct. It obviously did not come into contact with the river water, but it's nonetheless sitting on the side of the river for 7 months, and then it gets exposed to the river water somehow because that's the diatoms magically appear. So, given the temperature variance and they're not like they're protected by being inside the bag and everything, do you happen to know if the rubber bands could maintain their integrity during that 7 months?
I can answer that question because we did that experiment. Right, we had a set of rubber bands in battleground. Right, they were in battleground in a backyard in a tray, exposed to rain, sun, all that stuff under sand. Not in a bag, but under sand. But the bag, I think, is superfluous in this case because you've got the bag is protecting it from sunlight and that kind of thing, but rain still gets through. Sand is doing the same thing. The sunlight's not getting through the sand, right? And we saw the degradation profile. By 6 months, the rubber bands are falling apart. So
Okay,
you can take a look at the website.
So hold on a second. Let me just clear. So after 6-7 months, the rubber bands fell apart regardless, whether they were exposed directly to the sunlight or they were
under the sand. So,
or under the sand.
Let me be precise. There again, I have to be scientifically precise here because it's not polar. We stretched rubber bands to different lengths, right? If you see that board, lots of stretch, medium stretch, low stretch. The most stretches like we're all done. Half of like I'm off the top of my head. You go look at the website and see the medium stretches like were half of those things were broken, and of the low stretches, I don't think any of them were broken. Right. So, but the low stretches had very little tension on them. I don't think the tension would be enough to hold a bundle together.
Yeah, Tom, I'm actually pulling this up as we speak. This there it is. Here's your.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so the more they were stretched, the quicker they broke.
The quicker they fail. Yeah. The quicker.
Sure, that makes sense. I mean, that's logical, right?
Right.
Because their integrity is more compromised, I guess.
Right.
And
this was pretty similar across all the burials. We had
now,
one in the river. We had one in sand. We had the ones in my lab still are not broken,
but what is the one this one here that says 234 days on the right? Is this where was that buried or what?
I believe that particular one was in the river here by my house.
Oh, so that one was underwater.
Yeah.
So, but those ones on the right that aren't stretched.
Yes. But if you look carefully, they got little cracks in them.
Oh, do they? Okay.
If you zoom in, you'll see there's little cracks in them.
Yeah.
So and under any stretching, they would be falling apart already. So they're degraded. They just haven't snapped yet.
Now, I mean, but those are stretched. They're just not stretched a lot. I mean,
not stretched a lot. Yeah.
There's not. Okay. The ones on the far right. Okay. Now, okay. And now what Brian was saying today, when I asked him again about rubber bands, he said that, like I said, because I said, well, was there any indication that these rubber bands were holding anything together? He said, no. He said, because I saw them, basically there was hardly anything left of these rubber bands to the point where it wasn't like they were actually holding anything together. I would think that the water, being waterlogged, is what fused those bills together, I would think, as a packet or whatever.
Yeah.
I would think.
Rubber bands get moldy and gummy and will stick to stuff. So I'm not surprised he found some stuck to the bills, even if the rest of it was broken away. And then he flicked them off with his finger, I think is how he described it.
Yeah, I mean, he barely even remembers. Yeah, he says, I can't. He was really happy, though, today, because when I told him about your analysis, he goes, oh, well, he says, because he didn't want to be telling lies to people about these rubber bands, right? He didn't want to.
Yeah. We need to get Brian out there. We got to pay for him to get out there.
Yeah. He was saying that he wants to, come. He said he couldn't come this past year, but he'd like to come next year to CooperCon. But I think that was but yeah, so we got the DNA thing. I mean, the hair slide, I actually got, I checked on the hair slide, that FOIA that I filed. I actually checked on that, and it said that it had been closed and that something had been sent to me. Now, I've not gotten that in the mail yet. Now, like I said, I suspect they'll say, whatever. I mean, probably nothing. But if I had to guess, my guess would be that the hair slide, it surely exists. I bet it is in Vegas. And I think that's where they misplaced it, because that's the last place where we know that they had it. And it never, so what happened is in 1998, when they were starting to think about DNA stuff, they sent a memo to Portland and to Vegas saying, hey, if y'all have any physical evidence from NORJAC, send it to us, and go ahead and close your case out. It's called RUCing. They put RUC on the document, which means like we're referring it to the original case of origin, which is Seattle for NORJAC, right? So, of course, Vegas said, we don't have anything down here. And Seattle writes back and says, y'all are supposed to have cigarette butts and a hair slide. And they go, well, we don't have that. Well, then they look a little more and they say, actually, well, it turns out, sorry, folks, we destroyed the cigarettes in well, they don't say when, but it would have been in 71 when they destroyed them. most likely, because they sent them to the crime lab for fingerprint analysis and just to verify what brand of cigarettes it was. And they told the crime lab, this is the Vegas office, when y'all are done with it, if they have no evidentiary value, destroy them. And thankfully the crime lab, of course, was like, well, we're not destroying this. So they sent it back to Vegas. You guys can destroy it. If y'all want to destroy evidence, that's on y'all.
They don't want to get blamed for anything. That's
right.
Smart.
And so we actually don't have a return receipt on the hair slide from, 84. Okay, so 84 was the last time that they analyzed anybody's hair with the hair slide, and we actually don't have a return receipt. I mean, oftentimes in the files you'll see where they're like, okay, we received this back from DC or whatever, right? We don't have that, but that doesn't mean well, I guess I'm getting confused. I'm talking about the cigarettes, but the cigarettes.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, we don't have it. That's what it
we don't
to.
have either of these things. Now,
Right.
I'll wrap this up shortly, but you said you threw cold water on me a while back, Tom, and it hurt my feelings because I'm such a hair slide advocate here. Because I do think that would be, if you had his hair, well, geez, now, of course, I always joke about how the way the vortex is, that wouldn't be Cooper's hair. That would be the circus dwarf who sat on that seat on the earlier flight that day, right? We'd be like, oh, great, of course. It can't be Cooper.
Yeah, you can't hold out hope for that. That's not the Holy Grail.
No, because, and like you said too, that the hair slide would have been in some sort of
in a
gel
mounting medium.
Yeah,
It'd
right.
been mounted in balls. It's called balsam. It's like a pine tar. It would have been mounted inside a resin.
And that would contaminate, you think, the ability to.
Well, you got to dig the hair out of that stuff.
Right.
It's got a glass cover slip over it. You got to break through the cover slip. You got to dig it out of the resin, and then you got to take the root of the hair. That's where the DNA would be. And so, yeah, it was been sitting in pine tar for 50 years. So,
and so,
well,
go ahead.
What I'm concerned about, what I'm wondering, Tom, is like, how long is it going to take you to scientifically prove that Vince Peterson was D.B. Cooper?
Yeah, a couple hours. Give me a couple hours.
Complete.
I'm gonna make you a star, Eric. You're gonna owe me. I just need 10% of all the royalties coming from the books.
Hey, yeah, Eric. I don't know if you saw my comment earlier when you were saying that there are 3 rock stars in the Cooper case. You said it was Larry, Tom, and Tom Colbert for doing the FOIA stuff. And I said, well, I guess that makes you Ringo, right? Because you're the 4th one. That makes you Ringo. You're the
You're the
4th
guy who ends up solving it, but
if he had Ringo's money, he'd be fine.
Yeah, Tom, real quick, the total sidebar from Cooper. You were talking about dinosaur bones, DNA stuff. Like, I thought dinosaur bone. I thought fossils were just rocks, right?
And there you go. There's the argument, right? Everybody thought fossils are rocks.
Are they not?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what side of the fence you're on, right?
What do you mean? How was there
arguments don't end at Cooper World, right? They don't end in the vortex.
So
they go off into all this stuff.
Wait, so that's actually debated whether whether fossils or have organic material.
They're finding things. Well, I showed you how we can get titanium and antimony out of an instrument, right?
Yeah.
If you want to believe it's antimony, you can believe it's antimony. There might be other explanations, but if you want to believe it's antimony, if you put a dinosaur bone in a mass spectrometer, stuff comes out that looks like proteins. All right. Well, is it dinosaur proteins? Well, is it antimony?
Right.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, it could be. Is there other reasons? Are there reasons to believe it's not? Yeah, there are reasons to believe it's not. But I'll tell you, dinosaur proteins a lot more exciting, gets a lot more research time, gets a lot of money. If Tom Kaye comes along and says, no, it's bacteria, how many people do you think, yeah, I believe in Tom?
Right. Dang.
Even though bacteria is the 99% chance.
Right. Jeez.
Nowhere near as much fun.
Okay.
So I'm the Antichrist.
Well, I didn't say that.
You're the guy who rains on everyone's parade.
I rain on everybody's parade. Yeah, believe me, it screws me up too, right? So
yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other Coopery things in the news or things to discuss. Eric, you are going to appeal this lawsuit. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
The judges.
Well, hold on. I'm going to appeal it unless we can come to an agreement with something else. So stay tuned.
Okay.
How's that for a teaser? So,
You're threatening
yeah.
them. Okay, I see. Well,
How
cool.
many people are left? They still watching? We
Oh
still got
yeah,
an
we
audience?
still got full house. Yeah, I mean, people. Hey, Tom, you're the rock star.
Tom's
Yeah,
on. You're the star. You're the attraction. You know. That's right.
Elvis is in the building currently. Yes. Although people like to call, there are people who did call Eric Elvis back in the day. On Drop Zone, they used to call Eric Elvis. I think it was at Georgia maybe. Who calls him
Well,
Elvis?
that's because my avatar was Elvis. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's right. It was.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
one.
That's right.
So I'll throw in my 2 cents about Eric's particle, right? Which really
Yeah,
my
Well, hold
part,
on a
but-
second here. Let me just throw in as a side note, talking about Vince Peterson. Vince Peterson died August 16th, 2002, which is the 25th anniversary of Elvis's death, as a matter of coincidence. So there you go. So there you go. But yes, the particle.
The king. Okay, so Eric thinks it's a roller, right? We can test this. We're going to see. I'm going to get some stuff in and we'll see. I think it's a stainless bolt going through a titanium flange like you'd find in the chemical world, right? So we're switching over to titanium from stainless because titanium is more anti-corrosive. And this anti-corrosive thing keeps coming up, right? If we find from that salt, if your research on the salt goes to the anti-corrosion world, it's going to be pretty interesting. They were switching from stainless steel over to titanium tubes and pipes and vats and all that kind of stuff that they use in chemical processing for this highly corrosive stuff. But they wouldn't use titanium bolts because they weren't directly exposed to the elements in the tube. So when you have these flanges, you'll bolt them together with some bolts, and they would typically, I believe, I don't know 100%, they should be titanium in stainless in these chemical processing things. And when you screw a bolt down, you maul that bolt into the metal, and
Sure.
it would be pretty easy to get a particle of one mushing into the particle of the other. I agree. I'm 100% on board with the one mushed into the other. They're not sitting on top of each other because there's striations and stuff that shows that it's in there. So if you can find some roller stuff, that would be interesting. And let's see. I think it's a good angle, and I think it's getting us the publicity that Eric's getting in Pittsburgh. I think is super important. And I want to say publicly again that I think finally, after all the years I've been involved in the Cooper case, we're finally in the neighborhood, right? We're finally in the neighborhood. It's pretty damn obvious at this point, he came from a metallurgical neighborhood, right? The guy in that picture I showed you is Cooper, as far as I'm concerned. And we're in that neighborhood. So bravo, forge ahead, Cooperites.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty convinced that that it is a metallurgy type thing, and I mean, the thing is about if we talk about people talking about the thing about the tie coming from Goodwill or whatever it is, I mean, that's not how you approach things, right? Like the FBI or any law enforcement, like if a guy robbed a bank and some teller on the way out grabbed the guy's shirt and the guy ran off without his shirt, right? They're not gonna say, well, maybe he picked up this shirt from XYZ, right? It's the bank robber's shirt, so like it's almost like you're trying to find an excuse in a way to not accept the validity of a piece of evidence, right? And I mean, yeah, it could have come from Mars. I mean, but that's not the way that we operate. And again,
right, statistics is on our side here.
Yeah,
statistically, it's more likely to be Cooper's tie than not.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think about like even someone like McNally. McNally worked at a gas station. He was not a guy, but he owned a suit. I mean, everybody owned a suit and tie, and McNally wore a suit from his closet. And he didn't care about losing it because he's gonna go. He's about to make $500,000. He can buy another suit, right? He didn't care about it getting dirty or lost or leaving it behind or whatever. So the arguments I've never liked the arguments for Goodwill, because how does that help? I mean, you're doesn't help us. I mean, because look, maybe it did come from Goodwill, but we have to explore this avenue first, right? I mean, we have to I mean, I don't know. I just don't like the poo-pooing of the tie particles coming from somewhere else, because that doesn't. I mean, I don't know. And again, the tie particles seem to point toward aerospace adjacent anyway. So, and what we know of Cooper's brain, right? I mean, and that's the difference. I talk a lot about copycats, right? But he's not. The thing is, Cooper wasn't a copycat. Well, I mean, he may have been for Paul Senior or whatever. But point is that this is Cooper's masterpiece, right? There's only one Beatles, right? There's only one Da Vinci, right? So I mean, like, this was a masterpiece of a hijacking, perhaps. And so Cooper did have this intelligence about aviation, right? And so it makes sense that he would have aviation adjacent. It's almost like, you know, if a guy went and robbed a rodeo, right, and his blue jeans that they found at the crime scene, you know, had fertilizer on it or whatever, right? Well, the guy's a farmer. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is.
It's,
right?
it's the best we got. If you want to find them, this is the best avenue we've got. You know, so that's all it amounts to. If you get some DNA, you're still going to use the tie to verify it.
Right.
It'll be the second line of evidence, right? So
yeah, and
get the DNA. We'll work on the tie. Try and get the DNA. DNA is a mountain to climb, but it is climbable.
Yeah.
And like I say, I've offered up tape. All right, I'll offer up one of my tapes to the right forensic place that can get multiple hits off of that thing.
Yeah, and somebody asked here, Tom, real quick when we wrap up. Somebody asked, can you ask Tom how many of these tie particles could be found on the ties of the pilots?
Well, we couldn't find any particles on the guy that worked in Boeing. I mean, we had a guy that worked in Boeing in the mechanical shop and all that for he wore the tie for a decade. Approximately, he said, and he told us what particles should be on the tie, right? Including glow in the dark stuff to look for cracks, luminol or something they call it. And that we didn't find any of that on the tie. We didn't. It was clean as hell. You couldn't have determined anything about this guy from what was on his tie. And he was an engineer at Boeing wearing the thing daily, or enough to make that he should have had a bunch of stuff. He thought he had stuff on the tie. Cooper was a mess, man. Maybe that's why he wore a tie and he's going to jump out into the woods at night wearing a suit, because he didn't give a damn about his clothes. He's wiping the grease off on his tie and everything. He probably didn't give a damn. I'm gonna go in my tie and I'll blast through the woods. I don't care.
No, I tell you, it's pretty fascinating too. The fact that we've got, the fact that we actually have Tina seeing him put on the parachute, because think about McNally, right? McNally was wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt under his suit, and he sent the stewardesses to the front before he put his parachute on, right? He took his pants off and everything. So, we know that Cooper jumped looking like unless he took all that crap off of him while Tina in those 30 minutes, which I don't think he did, then he jumped out wearing a suit, whereas, but we wouldn't know that though. We would have to somebody like McNally comes along and informs the Vortex that he jumped wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt, and he threw his pants and stuff out the back. That would have, if we didn't know that Cooper had jumped, if we didn't know that Cooper had already had his stuff on and tied to him, right, then maybe that would have been a possibility that Cooper had thrown his stuff out. I always find it funny that when the FBI found McNally's pants, they said, "Oh, you see, this is proof he did die in the jump. That his pants got ripped off." They said that they thought his pants got ripped off.
The FBI always wants him to die in the jump.
They did. They did. And I will end this by saying that I have talked to a couple of FBI agents who were on the case in 71, for the book. And those guys, when I asked both of them, I said, be honest, this is after I got a good rapport with those guys, both lawyers, and I'm a lawyer, so we kind of got along. And so basically, when I talked to those guys, after I got a good rapport with them, I said, look, last question, shoot me straight. What did you guys actually believe, about Cooper and surviving, dying? He goes, oh, we knew within days, weeks that he lived. I mean, he said, I thought that was really fascinating, that they did that, they admitted that. They're like, oh yeah, we knew he lived. I mean, his thing was like, his whole thing was, what are we supposed to say other than, I mean, we can't say, yeah, well, crap, folks, he got away.
We
you know,
screwed up. We let him go. We messed
yeah,
it
he
up.
said, so of course we're going to say to the media he died, and we don't want to. And he said we wanted to discourage copycats, and of course I said, well, that didn't work, did it? I don't, just, not work at all. But they said that look, once nobody found a body in their backyard, once there was no parachute hung up in a tree, and then they knew. So anyway, well, I got to wrap this up, folks. All right. Well, anyway,
thanks. It was a good time.
Thanks for putting this together, Ryan. This is great. I'm glad that we could manage to get to talk with Tom and hear Tom and everything. So appreciate that very much.
Yeah, it was good because we didn't actually sit down much at CooperCon. We don't have.
No.
You'd think we'd have a discussion like this at CooperCon, Eric, but we don't really. You're running around all the time and stuff and taking care of biz. So it was good. It was very good. I'm glad to do it. So we'll go out there and find them, guys. We need a solution to the case so Eric can sleep.
And that's right. And please send me that salt analysis. I'm very excited to see that and wrap this case up once and for all.
Good. All right, everybody. Good night, Vortex.
all right. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Great. Thanks,
We'll
Ryan.
see you
Thank you.
soon.
Thanks, Tom. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.